All right. Hey, welcome everybody to Monster Monday. My name is DM Galabond, and this is Monster Monday for March 29th, 2021. And we are tonight getting to part 3 of our miniseries, The History of Goblins. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the religion and culture of goblins. Why are we taking so much time? Well, because we're building up to part 5 of our mini-series, where we're going to show you one way, certainly not the only way, certainly not a prescribed way, certainly not probably the best way, but in part 5, we are going to show you one way that you can build an entire campaign where the antagonist for your PCs from level 1 all the way up to level 20 is goblinoids and the creatures that are associated with goblin culture. So, tonight, this is religion and culture of the goblins. Before we start, as always, I want to have a big shout out to Mo over at the Tabletop Bellhop. Mo is the OG when it comes to all things with tabletop games, board games, party games, card games, you name it, he's got it over at the tabletopbellhop.com, as well as a whole galaxy of podcasts and live streams where they talk about where they do everything from actual play sessions of the games to interviews with game creators, designers, industry leaders, news reviews, whatever. It's all over there at the Tabletop Bellhop. So if you enjoy tabletop games, go check him out. All right, and tonight, what we are here to do is we are here to talk about the pantheon of goblin gods and the way that goblins set up their society and their culture. All right, so there is a whole list of goblin gods. This lovely fellow right here, he is the chief of the goblin gods, Old Fire Eyes himself. The conquering god Maglubiyet. But the order in which the goblin gods are generally listed are Bargrivyek, the goblin god of cooperation and territory, the peacekeeper. Okay, let that settle in. Goblins actually have a god of cooperation and one they call the peacekeeper. Goblins, peacekeeper. Okay, certainly seems out of left field for at least D&D lore of goblins. This is why next week we're going to talk about goblins from other IPs and how you can use those to flavor the goblins in your game at your table. Okay, next we have Khurgorbaeyag. Whew! Khurgorbaeyag. I need a drink after that. He is the goblin deity of slavery, oppression, and morale. The overseer, the one who says the beatings will continue until morale improves. And then we have Maglubiyet, the fire-eyed god, the conquering god, the ruler of all the goblinoid deities, the master of disaster, if you will. Then there is Meriadar, a god of art and crafts that is venerated by goblins as well as other races. Okay, now along with the goblin god of cooperation and a peacekeeper, I bet you didn't expect to see a goblin god of arts and crafts, did you? All right, then we have Stalker. Stalker, it's more a title than an actual name, because the goblins are afraid to give it an actual name, because giving it a name will give it even more power. This is the goblinoid deity of hate, death, and cold, the feared one. And then Kikanuti, the goddess of the desert goblins, the mother of goblins. All right. So there's a maternal goddess for the goblinoids. Interesting. Okay. Now, since we're looking at goblinoids as a whole, we don't want to leave out the hobgoblins and the bugbears. What we have here on this image is an image of Hruggek, the chief bugbear deity. But the hobgoblins have one particular god that is listed in sources. Now, 5th edition, they've done a lot to flesh out hobgoblin ranks and different types of hobgoblins, especially in Volos, but they really didn't expand on a pantheon for hobgoblins. So we presume that this Nomog-Geaya must be a hobgoblin add-on to the Goblinoid Pantheon. And Nomog-Geaya is the hobgoblin deity of war and authority. And the bugbears have a few deities. There's Grankhul, the bugbear deity of hunting, senses, and surprise. Hruggek, the bugbear deity of violence and combat, the chief of the bugbear gods. And then there's Skiggaret, the bugbear deity of fear. And so this is, I think, out of 1st edition. I believe the resource was Deities and Demigods, where this particular illustration came from. Okay, now, goblinoid social structure. So all goblinoids are tribal peoples. Goblins, hobgoblins, and bugbears are all said to live in tribes with bosses or chieftains or warlords as their leaders. And traditionally, the people who rise to leadership in goblinoid society are, as you might expect, the strongest, the fiercest, the meanest of their kind, and every goblinoid knows who is both above them and below them in the social strata. And every goblinoid cowers before those who are above them, and then they turn around and they dominate those who are below them. So this is a real sort of it's very much a meritocracy, in the sense that if you can kill your rivals or beat your rivals down, then you can rise to the top. And strength and fierceness and really kind of meanness are the only traits that move you up the ladder of goblinoid society in a general sense. Now, we're going to see that this is not always true, and that there's a little bit more complexity to it than that, but I had to fit everything on one slide, so I just wanted to give you kind of the thumbnail sketch here. All right, so now we have the goblinoid ranks, and every edition does a better job about highlighting one group of goblins. In 4th edition, if you were here for part 1 of this series, you saw where 4th edition really did sort of expand on, I believe it was the bugbears, and gave us like 6 or 7 different kinds of bugbears. You can go back and watch the archives on the YouTube channel. It's over there, and you can see where 4th edition did that. But in 5th edition, they've chosen to focus on the hobgoblins, and they have the most detailed ranks. But because goblinoids are all a similar type of people, slightly different abilities, slightly different tactics, slightly different strengths, but you can sort of take the template of hobgoblins and apply it both to goblins and to bugbears if you want to flesh out the ranks. So going from the rank of the highest to the lowest, or the caste, or the level of society, you have the Hobgoblin Warlord, who's a CR6, and the Hobgoblin Warlord is kind of going to be the king or the chieftain in a Hobgoblin tribe. Then you have the Hobgoblin Devastator, CR4. Now they're going to be kind of your shamans or your sorcerers, because they are the spellcasters, the primary spellcasters, if you will, within the Hobgoblin ranks. Then you'll have Hobgoblin Captains. Those are going to be the military commanders and the military generals. They are the ones who will order the troops into battle and deploy and make the strategic calls during a military engagement or a military campaign. Then there's the Hobgoblin Iron Shadow. Now you can think of those as shock troops, or maybe kind of the Hobgoblin version of Special Forces, the Hobgoblin Green Berets, if you will. Now, the Iron Shadow is a monk in terms of its class type, and it is a monk that has access to the shadow, the way of the shadow, a modified version of that fits Hobgoblin tactics. So these are monks that have a little bit of kind of spooky magic stuff going on, like where they can slip into a shadow and then like basically teleport through shadows from one part of the battlefield to the other, and great stealth and devastating hand-to-hand combat, as well as the ability to use weapons just like a monk PC can do. And then you have your run-of-the-mill hobgoblins, the CR 1/2. Those are the hobgoblins that come pouring over the brow of the hill and rushing into the village, cutting down the men, carrying off the women, enslaving the children, ransacking the houses, killing the livestock, burning everything, and then racing off with war cries, leaving the dead and dying in their wake. So those are the several ranks of the hobgoblins within 5th edition. You can take those kind of ranks and you can apply the same kind of thing in your game to true goblins and also to bugbears if you want to sort of make a much richer, much more layered society of goblinoids as a whole. And then you start to see where you're just going to have a ton of different options of how you can plug these guys into different areas. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about goblinoid religious rites. Goblin worship. Pretty much, with the exception of the god of arts and crafts, although the idea of what you guys, some of you may be familiar with the movie Whiplash, okay? You kind of imagine anybody that would be a goblin god of arts and crafts, kind of like the drum teacher in Whiplash, just sort of somebody that is going to push you like a drill sergeant until you get that face just right. That is not an eye. What is that? That's a messed up little piece of junk. You draw that eye again until you get it just right. That's kind of what I picture a goblin god of arts and crafts being like. And having said that, goblinoids live in terror of Maglubiyet and their other gods. Their gods reign by fear, and they demand blood and torture and sacrifice of vanquished foes and unworthy goblinoids. So fighting, war, conquest, and destruction are pretty much the sum total of what goblinoids know overall. Yes, some of them practice magic. Some of them actually do, you know, they're craftsmen. They make armor, they make weapons, they make those types of things. But primarily, their entire culture is driven around war and conquest and fighting. They enslave other races to do menial tasks, and they kill the lucky that they vanquish. The unlucky serve long months of enslavement before being turned over to the shamans and sorcerers for slow torture and ritual sacrifice on the altar of a goblinoid god. So this is sort of in D&D. This is the way D&D imagines goblins. Now, next week, when we talk about goblins from other IPs, we're going to see that goblins don't have to be that way. Not in your game, not at your table. You can approach goblins a bunch of different ways, and I'll even share next week how some bringing in ideas from other IPs has influenced the way goblins behave in the games that I run. Just because I've kind of had I've kind of fallen in love with a certain type of goblin, and that type of goblin always winds up showing up in my game when there are goblins and when goblins are called for. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to flip over from here, and we are going to look at some of the sources and talk a little bit more in depth about some of these things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a little bit more in depth at the list of D&D goblin deities, and this is from the Dungeons and Dragons wiki, dungeonsanddragons.fandom.com, and it's a list of D&D goblinoid deities. So, Bargrivyek, we said, is the deity of cooperation and territory, known as a peacekeeper because he tolerates no war between goblin tribes, but he's not gentle because he desires to see goblins destroy their enemies, particularly orcs. So it's very interesting that whereas we think of goblins having great animosity towards humans and dwarves and elves and everything, but in this deity's focus is get rid of those orcs. Okay, he's a large 8-foot-tall goblin with a high domed forehead, wears a calm expression, and carries a white-tipped flail. And he's on good terms with the goblins' racial god because both desire the rise of goblins to domination of other races. He fears the head of the pantheon, Maglubiyet, as well as the god of the hobgoblins, Nomog-Geaya. And then Hruggek urges Maglubiyet to act against Bargrivyek because Bargrivyek seeks to unite goblins and bugbears, something that Hruggek disapproves of. And his deceptively titled Realm of the Peaceable Lands can be found on Avernus, the first level of Bator, where he trains his goblin armies and leads raids against the realm of Khurgorbaeyag, god of the kobolds. So that's yet another irony. He pushes goblins in the material world to act against the orcs, but then on his own plane, he leads his goblins against the kobolds. All right. All right. Then we have Khurgorbaeyag, and he is the goblin deity of slavery, oppression, and morale. Acts as a trusted lieutenant of Maglubiyet. He secretly harbors a desire to rule the Goblin Pantheon himself. And so he first appeared in an article in Dragon Magazine in 1982, and then also in the book Monster Mythology including details about his priesthood. So if you want to have a campaign where it focuses like maybe on goblin deities, that's probably a good book to have in your library, the monster library or the monster mythology book. Khurgorbaeyag is a 9-foot tall muscular goblin with flame red skin speckled with orange and yellow scales. Communicates with his priest through omens. And then Nomog-Geaya is the god of hobgoblins. He is the chief rival of Khurgorbaeyag, and they both try to outdo each other to win favor with Maglubiyet. Khurgorbaeyag lives in Maglubiyet's realm of Clangor on the plain of Acheron. And Khurgorbaeyag believes his troops in the afterlife, the goblin spirits must fight all the harder against their orcish rivals in order to compensate for the laziness and clumsiness of the hobgoblins. Khurgorbaeyag shamans and priests are strictly regimented, strive to capture foes in combat rather than kill them in order to acquire more slaves for their tribe. And see, now you see here where it talks about the way they dress. Their priests wear red scale mail and war helmets. Ritual public torture is known as instruction among the followers of Khurgorbaeyag, as it is intended to instruct slaves as to their proper place in the world. Okay. Okay, so now in a Forgotten Realm, a tribe of goblins on the Chultan Peninsula worship an aspect of Khurgorbaeyag. It manifests as a powerful dinosaur. These goblins, which are the Batiri, call him Kuro and believe that he owns the jungle. Alright, Maglubiyet, god of goblins and hobgoblins. And he is described in Deities and Demigods by James Warren and Robert Kuntz, published by TSR in 1980. And he's called by many titles. Various books he's mentioned include Fiery Eyes, Mighty One, High Chieftain, Lord of Depths and Darkness. And again, here's another reference to that source book, Monster Mythology, which includes details about his priesthood. And he's got a role in the cosmology of the Planescape campaign setting. So that's another source you can look at for that one. And he is an 11-foot tall, black-skinned goblin with flaming eyes, powerfully muscled arms, and sharp talons. So now you notice how the higher they are in the hierarchy of gods, physically larger they are. Yeah, Maglubiyet is 11-foot tall goblin, and he just kind of towers over everybody else, and so everybody does what he says. Now, initially, they put Maglubiyet in the 9 hells, and he commanded the spirits of goblins in eternal war in hell, but they didn't elaborate further. And then Manual of the Plains is one of the first great blocks in the first layer of Acheron. He's said to dwell in the 9 hells again. Publication of the Planescape. It's revealed his home is Clangor, located in the plain of Acheron. So then we get to a little bit more information about where he lives and a few other entries of where he is detailed. And then, nice little factoid, in the basic D&D setting, Maglubiyet was known as Wogar. So then we have Meriadar, a deity of patience, tolerance, meditation, and arts and crafts. And again, he comes from monster mythology and part of the Planescape campaign. Patchwork creature like his chosen race. Portrayed with an elf's ears, a dwarf's nose, a human's chin, an orc's jaw, and a gnome's eyes. And then the other details of his appearance change from moment to moment. So he can appear as a tall figure of any humanoid race, and he wears simple brown robes. and is opposed by many evil humanoid gods, seeks to convert their followers to his more gentle philosophy. Not able to accept help from the good aligned gods of humans and demi-humans for any sign he was allied with the gods of the hereditary enemies of his chosen races would hurt his efforts in converting them. So he has a particular antipathy towards the gods of the Bugbear Pantheon. So this is a really weird and strange deity that you can throw in here, and I bet you're already seeing a potential. If you have a campaign where your antagonists are goblins, you might have a rather, maybe small but strong cult of Meriadar that is within that society, and they may be people that interact with the PCs, and you could even really kind of throw your PCs for a loop by having them, always be fighting these really super warlike goblins, and then run across this bunch of people who's kind of like the goblin version of Hare Krishnas, so it's it's sort of like, all right, who the heck are these guys and what do they want? And as a DM, you could really kind of mess with your PC's minds, and if you have players of a certain type, they may be constantly thinking, okay, DM, you're trying to pull something on me. You're trying to pull something. This can't be. And they'll be like, well, should we just kill and slaughter these guys because they're just as bad as the rest, or do we take them at their word? So that's as you can see, he's got a huge long entry here. So this is a really interesting way that you could sort of introduce a wrinkle and show a little bit more complexity within a civilization of goblinoids. All right. Then there's the hidden god. And the hidden god is very possibly another way that you could introduce Meriadar. Now, for those, I don't want to say too much, but because I know one of my groups is going to run across them, but in the recent publications of 5th edition campaigns that have come out since 2014, there is one of those campaigns where mongrel folk play a pretty significant role. There's quite a few of them in that campaign, at least in a couple of different areas, depending on where your PCs go. And I don't recall there being any kind of mention of Meriadar in that particular campaign. So we can... that's another type of way you could maybe show how mongrel folk and perhaps goblins that have some sort of disability, or maybe some kind of birth defect or something like that, they might be in part of this cult that venerates Meriadar. All right, so now we get to Stalker. Stalker is the goblinoid deity of hate, death, and cold. There's no true worshippers and an enemy of all things that live. And its symbol is a creeping shadow. Once again, it comes from that monster mythology book. It takes the form of a slow shadow, its size varying from 2 to 20 feet in length as the entity desires. Okay, and it particularly despises Meriadar. Oh, yeah, okay. If it's hate and death, I'm sure it would hate the arts and crafts guy. Stalker and its hate are strengthened by the deaths of goblinoids, so it always seeks to inspire war, conflict, and death. So now there's the Buka. Buka is a desert goblinoid from one of the editions of D&D, and this is where we get Kikanuti, goddess of the desert goblins, and one of the rare good aligned deities of goblinoids. Kikanuti brought them forth from, or goblinoids believe that Kikanuti brought them forth from the lower world, a great cavern that they call the second womb. She nurtures and protects them in the upper world from more savage races and against the harsh desert environment. So then we have the Hobgoblin deity, Nomog-Geaya, and once again, comes out of the Monster Mythology book, and here's that more Dragon Magazine articles for you. You can go back through the archives. Appears as a huge, powerful goblin with rough ash gray skin, cold orange eyes, and teeth like a shark's. And almost always has a broadsword in one hand and his axe in the other. The patron deity of Hobgoblin, second only to Maglubiyet in Hobgoblin religion. 5 directives of the soldiers of the last order, which are those the soldiers of the last order is a cult dedicated to Nomog-Geaya. So their 5 directives are: arm yourselves with fire and steel, rally all hobgoblin tribes under your banner, hunt elves and goblins and put them to the sword, burn prisoners alive and sacrifice to Nomog-Geaya. Nomog-Geaya will accept no other sacrifice, and honor no god above Nomog-Geaya. And then the Bugbear Pantheon, usually read by Hruggek, god of violence and combat, and first mentioned in the source book of deities and demigods, which says there are 6 deities, but and includes gods of earth, death, fertility, hunting, and fear. But only Hruggek is mentioned by name and is given any kind of detail. So you certainly could go out there and find yourself in other pantheons, find a god of earth, of death, of fertility, of hunting, and of fear, slap a name on it that sounds vaguely goblinoid, and say, okay, in your campaign, these are who the other bugbear deities are. So we have Grankhul, the bugbear deity of hunting, senses, and surprise. And Grankhul appears as a tall, relatively lean bugbear with large protruding eyes and very long, thin fingers. And then Hruggek is the chief deity, and he is a huge, powerful bugbear, 12 feet tall, great fangs and clawed hands and feet, and wields a morning star. Other gods worshipped or feared by the bugbears, including Grankhul, and then Stalker and Skiggaret. And then Hruggek's Cave and Hruggek his realm in the second layer of Pandemonium. And Castes is surrounded by severed heads of various races, which continually cry his praises or beg for mercy and gift him with powers against their respective people. Hruggek didn't make the heads, they were already there when he arrived, remnants of more ancient gods who carved the plains tunnels. Skiggaret is the bugbear deity of fear, and appears as a bugbear with jet black fur, red lips, red hands, and red feet. The smile playing around his mouth is at least half insane. Right. So now you get a sense of where goblinoid worship kind of went wrong. Is they have these gods that basically just want them to kill each other and destroy everything, and they are half mad. It's like, it's kind of like is kind of like worshiping the Joker. If you if you were someone in the DC universe, it would be like kind of turning the Joker into a deity. Is kind of like this Skiggaret, except dressing him up in a Bugbear costume. Okay, so this is a bit of the pantheon that you have to work with from the D&D side of things. And certainly you are free to, in your game, you are free to concentrate on, one or two of these deities if you want a antagonistic goblinoid host to be motivated, let's say, by religion. Like there's some kind of goblinoid religious crusade that's going on that's at the heart of all of this problem. And then maybe they have some sort of grand scheme that they are trying to do. You can sort of riff on a storyline like the Tyranny of Dragons, and instead make it something like maybe the Madness of Goblins, and they are trying to get to a point like where they can manifest and bring Maglubiyet into the natural world. That might be a thing that could drive a goblinoid society, and just because of their sheer numbers would make them an antagonist for your party all the way up to high level. And of course, they'd probably have some very powerful allies that were working with them on something like that. Okay, goblinoids, if we shift a little bit over to looking at the society of goblins from looking at their religion, goblinoids are the conquering host. Maglubiyet is truly the conquering god. He stiffens the spines of cowardly goblins, rouses bugbears from their lazy slumber, and he sets the thunderous step of hobgoblin legions. Maglubiyet takes 3 races and turns them into one people. Bygone times, goblinoids were distinct from one another with separate faiths and different customs. Maglubiyet came and conquered all who stood before him, mortals and deities alike. Gods and heroes who wouldn't bend to his will were broken and discarded. Put his foot on the neck of mighty Khurgorbaeyag, bound the will of intractable Hruggek, and forced sadistic Nomog-Geaya to fall in line. What the goblins, bugbears, and hobgoblins were before their gods bowed to Maglubiyet no longer matters. Now they are, first of all, followers of Maglubiyet. On the surface, goblins, bugbears, and hobgoblins are as different as halflings, dwarves, and elves. Each race has its own tendencies, outlook, culture, and gods, but Maglubiyet's hand joins them together. All right, so let's take a look then at how this manifests in terms of the structure of the society of each of these 3 races. We're going to look first of all at goblins themselves. Okay, family matters. Goblin tribes organized into a 4-tiered caste system. So you have your lashers, hunters, gatherers, and pariahs. The lashers are the closest thing that goblins have to nobility. The lashers are families of goblins trained in the ways of battle and possessed of key skills such as strategy, trap building, beast taming, mining, smelting, forging, and religion. Then you have the hunters, families of goblins that are skilled in the use of weapons but not privy to any other special knowledge, have the second highest status in the tribe. Hunters often make the best wolf riders and know the most about territory farthest from the tribe's lair. Gatherers, the families in the second lowest caste, are responsible for getting food from the surrounding area, taking what's naturally available, or stealing whatever they can. Gatherers also do the little amount of farming which goblins are capable, and are charged with checking and traps for captured people or beasts. They usually aren't armed with weapons more deadly than a sling or a knife. And then pariahs. Some goblin families, the lowest of the low, composed of the most dim-witted, least educated, and weakest goblins. They get the worst jobs, mucking out animal pens, cleaning up after other goblins, and doing any hard labor such as digging mines. The goblin tribe has slaves to do some of its work. The pariah families enjoy the opportunity to supervise and dominate such creatures which have no status at all. And then there's status symbols among goblins. They love symbols of authority, so the tribe's boss often has trappings wherever he or she goes. Take the form of a crown or a throne, but also can be more distinctive objects like a high-backed wolf saddle or colorful boots. Castes in a tribe also adopt symbols to indicate members or kinship, but the symbols usually are rarely the same between different tribes and often make little sense to other creatures. And then there's some, random status symbols here. Then you have the Buyags. The Buyags are spellcasters of any sort among the goblins. They typically lack the intelligence or patience needed to learn or practice wizardry, but there's always the potential for being sorcerers or warlocks or things like that. So then you have within the Buyags, you have the Buyag Caste. Buyag Caster. This goblin served under a hobgoblin wizard, stole a look at its master's spellbook, learned a little wizardry by aping the gestures and words it remembered. Can cast randomly determined first-level wizard spell once per day. And then the Buyag Wielder, this goblin found a magic item or the like and learned how to use it. Then there's the Buyag Whip, Khurgorbaeyag saw fit to gift this goblin with powers that enable it to dominate others. And then the goblin has 1 to D3 other goblins that slavishly obey its orders. Buyag Slave. This goblin warlock serves the patron who can extract payment in flesh if the goblin doesn't do as promised. And then there's the Buyag. This goblin is a sorcerer with a wild magic origin, whose every casting, including cantrips, is accompanied by a wild magic surge. I love it. See, this is where you kind of get where the kind of goblins that I like start to creep into the official lore of Goblin D&D. Alright, you have goblin lairs. The tribes of goblins take up residence in shrouded valleys, shaded forests, and caves and tunnels beneath the surface of the world. They like to live near where they can get raw materials easily, and also near where they can kind of steal whatever they want from the settlements of other people. And in the outskirts, there will be some animal guardians like packs of wolves, Lair exterior, and then there's telltale signs of habitation, complete with goblins at work and other goblins standing guard over them. And the Lair interior has abandoned mine that features 2 or 3 large chambers and a few smaller ones with tunnels connecting them. So then we come to the bugbears. So bugbears bugbears have kind of a gang mentality. They're not particularly industrious. And in fact, they're considered shiftless, savage layabouts. So they're not particularly industrious. Their overall population is small and spread over a wide area. They live in family groups that operate much like gangs. Individuals in a group typically number fewer than a dozen. In good times, a gang is tight-knit and its members cooperate well when hunting or bullying other creatures. But when fortunes of a gang turn sour, they will become selfish and they turn on each other. Left to their own devices, bugbears have little more impact in the world than wolf packs. Subsist by crafting simple tools and hunting and gathering food, and gangs sometimes come together peacefully to exchange members and goods between them. Alright, so Blessings of the Bugbear gods. They have no use for priests or shamans. No one. We don't need no priests or shamans, says the Bugbears. No one needs to tell them what their gods want. The brother gods are angry with them. They let the Bugbears know with bolts of lightning, Hruggek, or striking them blind or dead. Grankhul. It's like it's a very visceral religion. I'll just wait until Hruggek shows me a sign. Bam! Oh crap! Okay, that was a sign. I guess that means this is the wrong thing to do. I'm gonna go do something else. All right. So then we have hobgoblins. Hobgoblins are the civilized and militaristic members of the goblinoid race. The hobgoblins hold themselves to high standards of military honor. The race has a long history of shared traditions, recorded and retold, to keep the knowledge fresh for new generations. The hobgoblins aren't waging war. They farm, they build, they practice both martial and arcane arts. These trappings of civil society do little to conceal an underlying brutality that goblins practice on each other and perfect upon other races. Punishment for infractions of hobgoblin law are swift and merciless. Beauty is something that hobgoblins associate only with images of conflict and warfare. So they bloody blue noses. Hobgoblins sometimes born with bright red or blue noses. Attribute is thought to be a sign of potency and potential. Blue and red-nosed goblins or hobgoblins receive preferential treatment. As a result, they occupy the most of the leadership positions in hobgoblin society. The noses of all hobgoblins become more colorful when they are enraged or excited, much the way that humans' cheeks can flush with emotion. So, rank, status, and title. So, as in any strict military hierarchy, every hobgoblin in a legion has a rank from the warlord down through a cadre of officers and soldiers that make up most of its number. So, you have the warlords at the top, the generals, the captains, the fatal axes, the spears, the fists, and the final and lowest rank is the soldier. Legion is organized into units called banners, each one made up of a group of interrelated families. Members of a banner live, work, and fight together. Each banner has separate status within the Legion that is reflected in the power of its officers. So honor-bound and by glory crowned. Advancement in rank comes as a result of attaining glory. But for the achievements to mean anything, a hobgoblin must abide by the race's code of honor in doing so. So glory can be earned in many ways. Discover great resources, find performances, designing, constructing a great defense or monument, and through other means. Now, there's a rather detailed honor system or honor code for hobgoblins, and this can really help when you're sort of crafting and putting together sort of the sort of a way that a goblinoid culture, like a goblinoid kingdom or society or empire even, might be run, because you have to imagine that the hobgoblins are probably going to be at the top of that, and so they're sort of going to be able to dictate to the bugbears and the goblins what the actual code is going to be. So the honor system for hobgoblins includes follow orders, carrying out orders without question, honor the gods, give regular recognition of the deities left to them after Maglubiyet's conquest, suffer nor give insult. So, as befits their warlike nature, any insult demands a response. Suitably and somewhat ironically, the outward politeness and civility that they demonstrate among each other enables them to avoid conflicts in daily life. Reward glorious action. Hobgoblins never deny advancement and status to a banner that has earned it, nor do they withhold higher rank from a deserving individual. And uphold the Legion. Goblins care more for the survival of their legion than they do for others of their own kind. Then there's the Iron Shadows, and this is we talked about. There's kind of the spell wielding kind of monk-like hobgoblins. Unarmed combat called Path of the Iron Shadow. Practitioners are known as Iron Shadows. Serve as a secret police force and spy network in Hobgoblin society, or as special forces, as we talked about before. Academy of Devastation, know the value of arcane magic and warfare, or other cultures treat magic as an individual pursuit. Calling and only a select few can attempt. Hobgoblins practice mass indoctrinations and testing to identify every potential caster in their ranks. You can clearly see the influence here from some science fiction universes where, like all kids are forced to be tested whether they have, psychic or psionic or magical abilities, and then if they do, they get taken away from their parents and put into special academies and trained, which of course in the real world a lot of times we see that happens in sports, where, especially in places like South America, if some 4 or 5-year-old kid shows a real aptitude for kicking a soccer ball around, mom and dad, you better watch out, because some coach may drive up in a big black SUV, pull the kid inside, and take him off to some boarding school where they basically play soccer before class, during class, after class, and then before bed. It's like, and then that's all they do for the next 10 years. So Hobgoblin lairs or bases, or Hobgoblin lairs kind of look like a military base. So that's one of the structures. And speaking of that, I have an image up here that we can look at as a Goblinoid war camp. Right, so this Goblinoid war camp, you see how well organized and laid out this is, and where it's kind of strategically done, where you have these kind of serpentine walls, an outer ditch system, and then every path that comes in doesn't go straight to the middle. It forces you to go around one of these serpentine walls. And then the interior here, you have all of these nice big constructed houses. Those are all the Hobgoblin barracks. And then the masses of round huts, those are all the goblin huts. And then these few little sort of structures that are sandwiched in between there, those are the bugbear, bugbear dens. And then you've got pits like for latrines and animal pens, and then areas to hold slaves and those types of things, and then supply wagons. So when you see a group of goblinoids on the path to war or preparing for a battle, they may erect a war camp like this that will serve as their base of operations. So you're going to have a command center where the warlord resides in the command center, a large wooden building in the middle of the camp. Goblinoid quarters. Each type of goblinoid gets its own accommodations. Bugbear dens. The gangs dig their dens wherever they wish. The goblin hovels settle wherever their hobgoblin commanders tell them to. Quarters usually surround the areas where the slaves and beasts are kept. And then the hobgoblin barracks have the most spacious and well-appointed quarters in a war camp. Each of the banners in a legion has its own group of lodges in one of the quadrants of the interior, each one facing the pathway that runs past its front door. Then there's a library that is part of a war camp because, and of course, as you might imagine, the library has a bent towards either useful combat magic or if it's not magical stuff, then it would be like military strategy and drilling or creating different kinds of weapons and those types of things. That's sort of where the strength of this is going to be. The pens and the pits, the goblins responsible for tending to the camp's slaves, battle beasts, and beasts of burden. The rookery, they keep flocks of ravens that serve as messengers and spies. A huge tree-like conglomeration of metal and wood serves the ravens as a roost and nesting place. Then all the supply wagons, members of the army are expected to maintain their own battle gear, ammunition, and replacement gear kept on hand. And then the block. Maglubiyet's holy symbol is a headman's axe, and the block is where it is blessed by feeding it the lifeblood of conquered foes and goblinoids that neglect their duties. So this is sort of a look at how you might imagine a little bit of the strata of goblinoid society, and then thinking of a goblinoid host that would be going to war, and that your party members or their allies might come up against at some point. Because, if you could imagine, like, there's 50,000 goblinoids coming to attack your kingdom, depending on what level your party is, the monarch in that area might say, hey, guys, adventurers, you've done a lot of stuff. Go investigate that war camp and find out what's there. And if you can, do something about that warlord in the middle of it. So then that would be a really challenging and interesting way to have a small number of relatively high-level PCs have to deal with just an absolute horde. Tons of monsters that normally would be such low level that, they'd hardly be a speed bump. But, when it's 5 level 10 heroes against, 15 goblins, that's child's play. But when it becomes 5 level 10 heroes against 1,500 goblins, okay, now that's another matter entirely, because just by the sheer numbers, are you really going to be able to, by force, deal with that many enemies for a sustained period of time? All right, so that is our look at goblin deities and the structure of goblin society for this evening. What I want to do now is I want to go and talk a little bit about what is coming up next. We have 2 more parts in this Goblinoid series. Part 4. Next week, we are going to be looking at goblins from other IPs. So things like the World of Warcraft game, Magic the Gathering, Middle-earth, the novels of J.R.R. Tolkien, the Elder Scrolls game, the EverQuest game, other MMOs. Now, this is not intended to be an exhaustive list, because I certainly could not come up with an exhaustive list of all of the other IPs where goblins appear. I'm just going to talk about a few of the types of goblins that I know fairly well, and the way they have influenced how goblins manifest in my game world. When I am running a game and the PCs run across goblins, they're going to be influenced by the way goblins behave in some of these other IPs outside of D&D. And then in part 5, in 2 weeks, we will look at building an entire campaign around having goblinoid antagonists. So everything from, being in that sleepy little village that has goblin raiders coming in when they're first level baby adventurers, up to when they get higher level, maybe trying to deal with one of those big, huge, conquering armies of goblinoids and having to infiltrate a goblinoid war camp and deal with thousands and thousands of goblinoids all in one area. And then maybe at the higher and higher levels, maybe what is actually driving the goblins to finally, take this action and go on this war of conquest? What is behind that? Maybe ultimately that's what the PCs will have to face, but it's still kind of all in that path of your entire all of your antagonists from first level to 20th level are all built around goblins and goblinoids. So that's what we are going to look at in 2 weeks. All right, let me see if I have any questions in the chat. I don't see any questions in the chat, so let me go ahead and go into the wrap-up, and then I'll double-check for questions again. Thank you very much for hanging out this evening. This has been our discussion of Goblin Gods and Society. I've been DM Galabond. You can show up here on Twitch 3 other days a week, and you will see some live D&D. Actually, 3 other days a week we do stream. 2 of those days you'll see some live D&D. On Sunday afternoons, we're playing the Walker of Waterdeep. That is our Planeswalking campaign. Right now, they're in Kamigawa trying to figure out how they are going to fight a dragon that is one of the guardians of the entire plane. Then on Thursday night, we are in the Sword Coast Chronicles, where they are bumping around the misty land of Barovia and trying to figure out how they got there and how they can get out of there. And then on Saturday night, we have actually wrapped up, so I'm going to need to change this for next week. We have wrapped up our playthrough of the Lost Mine of Original D&D. And what we started doing this past Saturday is we started talking about what is the Saturday group going to do next. And the initial discussion with the group from Saturday night is that they kind of settled on they wanted to play something out of 2nd edition, and the players that were there said they would like to look at either Dark Sun or like to look at Dragonlance, or they would like to look at Ravenloft. And those are all 3 great settings, and I have source material for all 3 of those. We're going to have a couple of other players that weren't able to make it this past Saturday that we hope will be back with us next week, and we'll get kind of input from them. Hope we can sort of narrow it down to one of those, and then we'll start. I don't know how many planning sessions we're going to have. I would imagine it's going to be a total of 3 or 4 planning sessions as we figure out what all of the players kind of want to see as elements of the game that we're playing. And so things that I can drop in along the way as we build the plot. Then we'll begin creating characters for the campaign. I'll probably use those Saturday evening sessions to do some one-on-one with the players to kind of get them from wherever they come from to where all of the party members are going to meet. And then we'll launch into the campaign. So right now, your guess as to what that is going to be is as good as mine, because I'm having some help from the players to put together the final idea of what we're going to play. All right, and you can find archives of everything over on Twitch, archives of everything over on YouTube. All the live streams are obviously on Twitch, and then if you really want to help us out to do more things, we do have a Patreon. It'd be great to have some more folks join us over there. All right, that's going to do it for me, and I will go ahead and sign off as I always do by reminding you to watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everybody.